This episode of Skirmish Supremacy is brought to you by Reformation Brewery, the official beer of your game night.
Now you done it.
Oh.
No, I know. Yeah, now we got to start. I know. It's
I
depressing.
have to be professional.
Yeah. I know it's depressing for our fans, too.
Fans? I mean, you say that like there's somebody other than us that listens.
Okay, fan.
Now we're one person. This is getting creepier and creepier.
Pretty incredible.
It's just somebody sitting outside your back window, just like looking in the window and breathing intently.
Spoilers, it's me.
I have to do that to myself. So I just record it and then play it.
When you record it, you got to not wear pants.
I mean, that just makes it that much creepier. Because then I can go, the person breathing heavily behind me is not wearing any pants.
Oh, that's my plan, at least.
So I got to ask before we start this thing professionally, is that a stretch goal?
Yes. Working without pants, gaming without pants is definitely a stretch goal.
Oh, perfect.
We hit 15,000. We're going to do a whole live stream without pants.
Okay, we're going to hold you to that now. This is being recorded right now. So.
Say, I'm ready to do it. But the whole live stream will just be waist up, so you'll never know.
Yes, but everyone will try and figure out a way to get you to stand up.
Everybody's just going to have a black towel that just says censored right across their lap. The whole time.
That's right.
Then again, you could be Larry from Models Workshop and be in a hangout with me and some other folks and not be wearing any pants and not really being a problem until for some reason you decide to tilt your camera to show somebody something, and it shows your bright orange underwear to the world.
Oh, no.
Which, amazingly enough, actually matched his shirt.
Larry's getting called out.
Oh, I've called Larry out on his own podcast about that. So
Nice.
I really wish I were wearing bright orange underwear right now so I could tilt the camera appropriately.
All right, folks. Welcome back to episode 123 of Skirmish Supremacy. As I am your host, Tim Korkleski, joined by my co-host, Nick Bogart. And tonight we are joined with MS Farzan, who is here to talk about his 5th edition compatible game, Entromancy. Now, we're going to be calling him Sam the whole time, so don't let that confuse you. So, Sam, how's it going, man?
I'm here to put the Sam and MS Farzan.
Yes. People don't look into it too much. It's just going to become too confusing too fast. So we're just going from this point straight into it. Awesome.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess let's just dive right into this thing. So tell us a little bit about Entromancy.
Oh my God. Entromancy is for me, it's like a love letter to so many different things. It's a love letter to cyberpunk and urban fantasy. It's a love letter to San Francisco and our perception of what San Francisco could be in 60, 70, 80 years from now if a new element called ceridium were developed by green researchers to try and provide a source of sustainable energy. And that energy actually turned out to be a source of magic and something that exposes genetic mutations in certain members of the population and essentially gives birth to a new race of people. So I like to think of it as I would love to think of it as Neuromancer meets Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files.
Okay.
And yeah, so it's a D20
on 2 levels there.
I myself included. So yeah, it's a D20 game. It's 5th edition rules, although we've done a lot of streamlining to help with onboarding and to fit a cyberpunk system, and we're super excited about it.
Nice. And on a side note, I was just looking up at my bookshelf, and I don't find my Neuromancer up there. Now I'm kind of pissed. So somebody's got my Neuromancer. Sons of bitches. All right, anyway.
I could not fault them for stealing it from you.
Yeah, oh, it's one of my favorite books of all times. I'm a huge cyberpunk fan, so for me, this is amazing. So you blended a little bit of magic along with the high tech attitude of a William Gibson novel.
That's correct.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's like the reason why we say Jim Butcher meets William Gibson is that William Gibson, obviously his world is super dark. It's very tech forward, obviously, and in some ways it's impenetrable to the reader. Like it can be very inaccessible if you're reading Cyberpunk for the first time. Although it's one of my favorite books of all time. So we wanted to create something that from a gaming standpoint, felt accessible not only to fans of cyberpunk but also to fans of urban fantasy and more pulp fantasy and people who are excited to just get in and play and want to have spells as well as super cyber hacking abilities.
Nice. Okay, cool. So I guess let's walk through that because I know that you're using, 5th edition D20 mechanics because they do have the open license to do so. So how do you go about separating the cyber technology from the magic in a way that like creates its own flavor?
That's a really, really good question. And we've had to build some systems from the ground up just to suit that. Like we have a cybernetic system that obviously doesn't exist in many other forms of 5th edition. We have built out hacking in a way that essentially rests on skill checks. But, we've had to think through a lot of different things so that, if I want to say like, oh, I hack this console or I hack this drone, do I just roll the D20 and add my modifier to it? Well, we thought that's not really that interesting. So, there are access modifiers depending on like how close you are to the device and whether or not it's encrypted at a network level or at a global level. We've got like different types of counter hacking depending on what happens with the device that you're trying to hack. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got magic, which is powered, as I mentioned, by Ceridium. So we've had to build kind of like take the ideas of what spellcasting is in 5th edition and how it works and make it suit not only our system, but the genre and make it feel like every time you're casting a spell, you're using this renewable resource, but one that is limited in terms of how you can use it in any given scenario or a mission. So you don't have unlimited spells at your disposal because you don't have unlimited Ceridium at your disposal, but you can get more Ceridium. And if you do, you can cast more spells. So it's been a really interesting problem for us to tackle. And in development and playtesting, we've been having a lot of fun with it.
Cool. So let's break that down just a little bit more because I know that we have fans out there at D&D and we know how D&D spellcasting is kind of, if you're a wizard using the general archetype of the wizard, you have your spell book. In your spell book, it tells you the spells that you can learn throughout the day. You memorize those spells and then you're able to just cast like X amount throughout the day. How does that differentiate itself from the way that Ceridium works in Entromancy?
That's a really great question. So, when you choose a character, we have some advanced character creation rules that I won't get into right now. But in the basic sense, when you choose a character class, let's say you choose the Technomancer, which is a good example because they straddle the line between technology and magic, or what we call mancy. You'll get your attributes, your abilities. You'll get your a set of skills that you're proficient in, and you'll also get to choose 1 feat and 2 spells from the spell list that the Technomancer has. So when you choose to be a Technomancer, you are able to start customizing from the get-go by choosing a feat, which is kind of it's something that will affect your class globally and will help you in terms of utility. In some cases, like with the Technomancer, you can choose to specialize in what we call the Devious Prototype, which is a turret of some sorts that you can customize further later on. And then you get to choose 2 of your spells, which could be something like a white hat spell that increases your hacking skill by 5 points for a limited amount of time, or another type of spell that will allow you to take control of a drone or another net-enabled vehicle or console of some sort. And once you choose those spells, those are the spells that you are able to use for. I don't want to call it your level because we treat levels a little bit differently, but those are the spells that you get to use when you're in an adventure or a mission or an encounter, and you start with a certain amount of ceridium. I think the Technomancer starts with 8, but I can't remember. So some of your spells will cost 1, others will cost 2 ceridium, others will cost 3, depending on their power level. And different from the Technomancer, like if you chose a non-magic class like the Vanguard, which is kind of like a stealth-based assassin class, or the Revolutionary, which is like a gunslinging or a long-range sniper class. They don't have spells. Instead, you choose 2 talents from their talent trees rather than spells.
Okay, cool. So, in a way, and this is more for me than maybe some of the listeners. So, for me, the way that Ceridium feels is kind of like a combination of more of the 3rd edition Warlock meets a wizard, where it's like the Warlock had like a certain amount of, it had like powers, but it had a certain amount it could use throughout the day. It could kind of choose and go as it wishes, where kind of taking the Ceridium, you can memorize as many spells as you want, but certain ones are more powerful. So you have to really manage how much of it you use per spell.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way of looking at it. It's definitely a resource that throughout the fiction of the world is used, to power cars, and it's used to power certain types of weaponry and armor, but it also can be used to enact different magical spells, which is, you're exactly right. There are actually some classes in the game that we should probably save for a later time that don't use Ceridium, but are still able to have some magical repercussions. But by and large, it's used as a resource in a similar fashion.
Okay, excellent. So touching on the flip side of that, I am an old school cyberpunk player.
Nice.
And touching on the hacking and, you got games like, Cyberpunk and Shadowrun, where they have like the deckers and the hackers, and you always felt that if you played those classes, and some of the folks out there, you might have had some of the same experiences. Typically, a lot of game masters started to take those classes and turn them into more of NPCs, because if you were playing them as a player class, the moment that you would go into cyberspace in whatever setting it was almost like you were playing your own separate game for being a hacker or a decker. And I know that you said that you were working on some unique techniques that isn't just like, well, I roll a D20 versus modifier and yay, I either pass or fail. How did you add that flavor of being a hacker into the game and having that cybernetic ability without turning it into like some mini game off to the side that you only feel like you're playing?
That's a really great question, and one that we've worked really hard to develop an answer for. First of all, part of it has to do with a distinct design decision on our part, that by the time this world that we have envisioned occurs, the main players of that world, basically the player classes, each one of them is going to have some skill in hacking. It's not just going to be a separate subset of people who have like some hacking skills. We're thinking that, the Night Path, or the Night Agent, which is like a special agent, it's probably not likely that they have no hacking skill whatsoever. Or the Vanguard, which is like our assassin type player, or, could be compared to like a rogue or a thief. It's probably not likely that they're going to get very far in life at their trade if they aren't able to like get past the security door that has a panel that is enabled with some sort of tech. Like they might be able to lockpick and that sort of thing. But at least in major urban centers at the end of the 21st century, if you're going to be a thief, you're probably going to have to learn how to hack something. So that automatically takes the idea of hacking and puts it in place of every character class, and some character classes will be better at it than others, but we don't have like one class that is just, you're a hacker and that's what you do, and you're of no use to us if we're not going on a hacking mission. It's more to the degrees to which that you'll be able to be proficient at hacking. And then we looked at a lot of this actually came out of playtesting, and we looked at different use case scenarios for how are people hacking? What ways? What are the ways in which they're engaging with what we call the network? And how are what are the fun aspects of hacking, and what is like just boring to everybody else because I'm hacking and, like you said, nobody else is doing it for 20 minutes. So we've built that into the system as it is, and I'm really glad that you're asking this question, because we also have a stretch goal, which is our longest stretch goal by far that we're working on right now, which is a card-based hacking game that everybody at the table can play. Okay. And fascinatingly, it's playable in under a minute. So it's not like, all right, I'm going to hack this device, and you and I, like you as the GM and me as the technomancer, we're going to sit here for 20 minutes and do this hacking thing, and everyone else goes to get a bag of chips. It's like, we're going to play this in under a minute, and other people at the table that want to can participate in it, regardless of their skill level. And then it resolves and we can move forward. And for those who want to use the hacking card game, they can, but it's totally optional. It's meant to be additive to the experience.
Cool. So in a way, it involves everybody else. Well, it has the option of involving everybody else at the table, so they don't feel like they're just sitting there while you're doing stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. So also during the hacking thing, and this is another thing. So again, we're talking difficulties that have always been shown in the other RPGs. Typically, whenever somebody like data jacks into whatever network they're doing, they almost like just fall into this catatonic state, and then your street samurai or your solo or what, again, pick your game, whichever one you're playing is basically just standing there the whole time, protecting your catatonic body from someone just putting a bullet in your head.
Right. So, right.
How do you kind of work around that in the game? Is it still something to where when somebody hacks into the network that they kind of fall catatonic and everything else, or are they still up and agile?
It's totally different, and we have rules for that. So essentially in our world, everybody has what's called a digitab. It's like it's kind of like the cross between an iPad or a tablet with the types of tablets you'll see in like the new Deus Ex games. And so like to gain entry to, let's say, a certain building, I'll have to have access on my digitab that allows me to enter the building. If I don't, I'm going to use my digitab to hack the console or the turret or whatever it is I need to do to get into the building. Right. And so our rules are based upon using your digitab to create some sort of effect through hacking, and everybody has one. It's as commonplace as cell phones are today. Now, if you're trying to hack, there are certain rules based on how close you are to the object, whether or not the object is encrypted, what level of encryption based on the security, and also how much time it takes to hack that object. If you're hacking, if you got nothing to do and you're just hanging around on a Sunday afternoon, you're trying to hack into a mainframe, sure, you can take time to do that, but there will be security measures that might come after you, so on and so forth. But if you're trying to do that in the middle of combat, there are going to be repercussions for that. You're not necessarily excluded from doing other things, but you're going to have to be really good at hacking and really patient with your hacking checks, and we'll have to continue to do that because combat keeps happening around you, and it's not necessarily that you're catatonic, as you said, but you're limited as to what you can do if you want to complete your hacking check, because otherwise that wouldn't really be realistic.
Right. Okay, cool. Because I know that was, again, kind of going back to some of the older systems and the way that the mechanics were handled. That's usually why, like the Decker and the Hacker and classes like that, and most of your other cyberpunk style games, where a lot of GMs I knew of almost never allowed PCs to play those because of those two elements.
Totally. And it's something we've been trying. We're big fans of those games. I think all of us have played Shadowrun, or, I do a lot of theory crafting and like just a lot of crunching and thinking about how to make systems better. Particularly, in this case, because it's a cyberpunk game with hacking, but, we also want to, one of our design decision is to have a faction system to encourage people to ally themselves with different NPC factions and to have stakes when they do so. I think it's this weird situation of honoring other game systems and really enjoying what they bring to the table, and also being such big fans of them that the pieces of them that we're inspired by, we want to make better in our game. We want to make it more accessible to do hacking for everyone, and also make it more exciting so that you can have these like cinematic action sequences where the Night Path like casts a spell, so he teleports himself like 30 feet or 60 feet or whatever the spell description says, and like immediately attacks someone while someone else is like hacking the Merlin class walker drone, and yet another person is like picking someone off like using a sniper rifle. Like these kind of things have happened in our playtests, and like we're pretty excited that it's working, and like the systems we're trying to get out there and to propose as alternatives to the way that hacking has been presented in the past. Like we're finding a lot of excitement around them.
Nice. Okay. Excellent. So you mentioned systems. We've talked quite a bit about these two things. Now, with this one, you've chosen to use the D20 mechanics of 5th edition. So what drew you to using more of the, I guess if you want to call it the modern D&D compared to designing your own system?
Awesome. I can say with certainty that the first, I want to say 2 or 3 iterations of the game were actually built around a proprietary system that we were working on. There's so many things that come into doing that. And one of our design pillars, if you will, is accessibility. And we want people to be able to pick up the game, read through the first, few pages for, let's say 30 minutes, and be able to pick up and play, particularly if they're familiar with other types of role-playing games. So like if you've played 5th edition or pretty much any D20 game for the past 10, 15 years, I think it will be instantly familiar, but also it will become very clear how we differentiate ourselves from other D20 based games. And it took us some time to port over the rules from and the world and the systems and everything from the proprietary system we were building. But what the D20 system affords us to do is start working with a system that is already internally play tested and that has several years of playtesting backing it up, so that we can spend more time building our systems and building our cybernetics and really making the game feel cinematic and lived in terms of the world that we're creating. But it also allows us to speak the same language as a lot of other RPG players out there without asking them to, not only learn about our world and learn about the new systems that we're building, but we would be asking them to learn an entirely different set and maybe asking them to buy different types of dice or something like that. And we want to be able to feel familiar, but also different to everyone out there who's already experienced something like 5th edition. Okay,
excellent. So it's definitely an accessibility thing over anything else. Just you want to make sure everybody can get into the game. I'd say 90% of RPG players out there, maybe 95%, have played some iteration of D&D or Pathfinder or some open D20 something somewhere along the lines.
I think you're totally right. And I had this experience, if you can believe it, IGM 3 5th edition campaigns right now.
You're insane.
I am. Yeah, it's just, I don't know why I do this, but it's because I love it, So, and one of them was for a new group of, we split them into 2 different groups, but let's say 10, 11 players that have never really experienced RPG gaming at all. Like maybe a couple of them have played D&D or Pathfinder, but by and large, the rest of them have very, very little tabletop experience. And just getting us over the initial hump of onboarding and learning what, tabletop role playing is and the specifics of creating a character and the rules. Although, don't get me wrong, I think 5th edition does it better than any edition prior, and I think it's a wonderful game system. We have been working really hard to streamline a lot of the onboarding so that even players who have never touched an RPG before can look at it and be like, I kind of get what this is about. It's going to take me a couple of sessions to learn how to do this. But because, so-and-so, my friend or my GM or whatever has played before, like I intuitively understand how this game is meant to be played. And we want that to be at the forefront of the gameplay experience with a lot of depth to back it up for people who have been playing for a long time.
Okay, excellent. So one of the things that it's always been a love-hate relationship with certain RPG groups when it comes time to, I guess if you want to call them a D20 system, of the idea of levels to some people have always been one of those things to where they look at levels and they're like, well, that doesn't really fit with like the grittiness we're trying to go through with the world. And I remember there was a couple iterations of like back when it was still third edition, the D20 modern, where they tried doing some cyberpunk stuff where I was like, I don't care for this version of it. Cause I don't like the idea that I level up and now I can be shot by the same gun one more time before I go down. Like how do you balance the grittiness that comes with like the world, well, any cyberpunk genre with like the ability to level?
Great question. And I'll try and unpack that without getting too like in the weeds about like game design. But there's a point at which I think if you look like at a system like GURPS, which is really good at the simulationist aspect of role-playing games, you have this really granular system that if you're into that sort of thing, you can create a really interesting campaign and a really interesting world and just do a lot of fascinating things with it in terms of combat and character creation and progression. On the other end of the spectrum, I think you have something like Dungeons and Dragons, which is really has some of the simulation in it, but it's really heroic and it's about storytelling, and there's definitely a lot of crunch there, but a different level of granularity than something like GURPS or even Shadowrun. We're on the line of how do we make a game that feels heroic and that has that fantasy element, particularly that urban fantasy element, while still staying true to the cyberpunk ethos, which is like gritty and dark and exciting in its like technology forward dismalness, if that's a word. Like it's definitely like, we have a dystopian world where like stuff's gone bad, but like because it's urban fantasy, like stuff is also good. And so the way that we've approached leveling in this game is to eliminate the concept of tying your character's progression to levels, and instead approaching a mission-based sort of progression or a milestone-based progression. So the way character progression works in Entromancy is that the very first thing you do is that you take on your very first mission, which is now, because thankfully one of our stretch goals has already been met, which is the first mission in the game, which is called the Presidio Heist. And you tackle that first mission, and after you complete certain numbers of missions, those are considered to be milestones for your characters. So when you complete your first mission, for example, you get to add another feat or another spell to your character list, from your character list to your character. Or when you reach a certain level, you'll get to add an advanced cybernetic to your character with a max of two cybernetics, but 2 advanced cybernetics, and we have different slots for your cybernetics. So like you can't have 2 body cybernetics. You have to have, you get to choose 1. When you have accomplished 5 missions or more missions, you get to choose what's called a destiny. That's kind of like our version of a prestige class. Okay. And the prestige classes add like completely different layers of power and utility, and some of them are based not only on how many missions you've accomplished, but what your rating is or your ranking is with a particular faction that sponsors that destiny. So first and foremost, we wanted to eliminate the need to jot down your XP and figure out your XP. It's just a milestone system of progression. But also, rather than levels, we have worked in the mission system so that we have almost like a psychological break between missions. It's that you've done this thing and it was a really hard thing to do. And coming out of that, you've learned a new thing. You've learned a new talent if you're a melee-based or a range-based class, or you've learned a new spell through that experience. And after gaining a certain political cachet with one of the factions, after, let's say, doing 5 missions, you've unlocked the ability to commit to a destiny.
Okay, awesome. So you've definitely taken your own version of level progression. You haven't just done the whole, I hate to use this old trope, but it's one I always fall back on when I talk, again, the differences between more of the narrative-based games compared to level-based, where, narrative games, like the way you progress, because it's typically like skill-based, like you'll learn, you're like, okay, I've gained a level, or, I haven't really gained a level, but I've gained X amount of XP. I'm going to spend the XP to, improve my strength and my ability to fight and like maybe my hacking, compared to like a level game where, one of the things we always kind of joke about is the idea that it's like, if I stab 5 more orcs, I learn how to climb and learn a new language.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way of describing it.
I learned Orcish and Dead Orcish.
Yeah. Congratulations. So yeah, because that was, and again, like it works for D&D just because of what it is and like a lot of those high fantasy settings. But when you start, again, when you're talking about more of like the grittiness of cyberpunk and even, Dresden Files, things like that, like you start thinking of stuff like that and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you like the trope of like, we all meet in a bar for the first time. It's like, yeah, that probably means that 2 of you are alcoholics, because again, that's this like the grittiness of the system compared to just like, oh no, a dwarf, elf, and, a paladin walk into a bar and, you make whatever jokes you want from there. But
right.
Typically like in a cyberpunk setting, it's like, yeah, that's, I'm sure there will be meetings in bars. It's probably not the best way to start this off, though.
Right. Right. You're probably going to get shot.
Yeah.
What good adventure has ever not started in a bar?
It's true. I mean, bars do have their place. I mean, we want to have like, so, to give you some insight, like one of our prestige classes or destinies is called the Arakar Elite. And the Arakar Elite are basically the closest advisors and security for the King of Aracom. Aurochs are one of the races in, I should say, subsets of Aurochs are races in the Entromancy setting, along with humans. And Aracom is a sovereign kingdom based in the North Bay above San Francisco that is essentially serves as the identity of the Auric people, who are the ones whose phenotypes or their features are exposed by being close to Ceridium. And to become an Arakar elite, you have to have a certain faction standing with Aracom. Otherwise, it really wouldn't make sense for your character to just like be able to be in this like really elite group without actually undergoing some sort of trial or having some sort of connection with Aracom through the first 5 missions. So if you like the skills that the Arakar Elite have, then it's going to be a really good idea to keep your eye on what Aracom is doing throughout the first 5 missions that you're completing, and try and get on their good side so that you actually have access to people who can teach you how to accomplish those talents that come with that prestige class.
Perfect. So in a way, like definitely having a tie to a faction and really paying attention to what's going on in the background, again, allows you to reach that point compared to I stab 5 orcs and now I know blood magic.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I mean, you might stab 5 orcs in the process, but it's like that's not the mechanism that gets you the level.
Yeah, exactly. We're not ruling it out.
Yes.
But
Orcs have a lot of blood. I mean, blood magic just is natural.
You need to have a resource.
Yeah, exactly. I get it. The orcs will do it. After a while, you just become like every orc just runs from you. They just know you. So obviously you got a lot of fantasy in this setting too, and with cyberpunk, it's like there's so much of cyberpunk that's about the attitude. How did you go about weaving the attitude into the game? Like, I know obviously you have your own spin on it, but tell us a little bit about how you went about doing it.
Yeah, that's oh man, I love talking about that. I published the first book of Entromancy called the Night Path trilogy a couple of years ago, and that was a 4-year process of like writing down names, like writing out characters, thinking about the world, trying to build a magic system that felt like internally consistent and that was actually inspired by gameplay systems. And I think that, you can create a house in that sense, but it's really not a home until you have that attitude.
Yeah.
So there's a couple different things. One is that, the determining what's cool in cyberpunk is, I think by and large, there are some tropes that, like when it comes to hacking or when it comes to, in some cases, like flying vehicles or dystopian techno forward futures. But there's also other things where like we can put our own spin on them. So like I think the revolutionary player class is a really good example of this. That she's based on a character in the book whose name is Vasca Lestrade, and she's a dwarf. And she's like one of the most BA dwarfs since like probably I want to say like Bruner Battlehammer or like one of the Lord of the Rings dwarves. So if you imagine like a dwarf like that, but with horns and also a gunslinger, like full on bolo tie and leather vest and like dual ceridium pistols that has our version of spring attack. That's kind of like the direction we've gone with some of that. So we have like the swagger, like Western aspect that we've put into the cyberpunk setting, and that we treat as like not one of the hallmarks of cyberpunk, but one that we think fits very well. And then we've also got like the Entromancer prestige class. So Entromancy is, not to spoil too much of the book in the setting, although it will be explained in the game. Entromancy is one of the many different forms of magic that have been rediscovered since the introduction of ceridium, and ceridium is said to be connected to another element which is called blue orichalcum that humanity depleted hundreds, if not thousands, of years ago, but explains why each society has a cultural memory of why of things like magic, of things like dragons, of things like elves and orcs and all of those things, because that element once existed and people, had shadowmancy spells, they had pyromancy spells, they had hydromancy spells, but they weren't able to use them anymore after they depleted this naturally occurring element. In the 2020s, in our world, green researchers in search of this renewable element created ceridium, which is basically similar to blue orichalcum, and that explains why these types of spell castings are now popular and effective. And the Entromancer is a new type of magic that depends upon like a butterfly effect, using entropy to their advantage to cast some of the most powerful and destructive spells in the game, in using the power of chaos, essentially. So we have all of these different things that are sourced from the fiction, from the novels, but also have taken a new light in the game because we've had to change a lot of different things to make them suitable for a role-playing game.
Right. So, and I know this is one of the things that, again, it's up to GM discretion, but typically in your cyberpunk setting, especially if you're trying to go more of the Gibson route, let's go down that path before we end up too far in the weeds. But if you're going down more of the Gibson route, if you want to call it that, there's usually quite a bit of mature themes that are in the game. Now, did you include some of the mature themes into Entromancy, or is that something that you tried to shy away from a little bit? Like, obviously, typically drug addiction and things like that are problems in a lot of cyberpunk settings where, again, they're kind of showing like that gritty side of the reality of it, where it's like, yeah, you could be that like super cool, street samurai that, does like the coolest, does the coolest nightclub drugs here and there, and it's like, oh yeah, look at me. I'm, I can get around this stuff. But then there's always like in the background, there's the people that, for lack of better terms, couldn't handle it and things like that, where they really kind of ground the setting in that way. Have you included some of those mature themes into the setting?
That's a really interesting point that you bring up. I've recently been reading The Sprawl, which is the Powered by the Apocalypse game, and I think they do that really well in terms of getting into the grit and just making it very, very in your face in terms of the mature themes. And of course, Cyberpunk 2077 just came out with their trailer, or like a gameplay trailer, and that's like pretty brutal.
Spoiler, I've watched it like 7 times already.
I mean, it's really intense.
It is.
So to answer your question, we've really had to struggle with a lot of that, particularly in light of the current political climate. The book, for example, the novel, deals with themes of second class citizenship because the Oryx, or what are called they're called the under races, because this new race of people have appeared that are actually humans with a specific mutation that makes them look a different way when they are exposed to ceridium. They've been exposed and they're not quite accepted into the commonplace at common cities because A, they look different and are different in a lot of ways, and B, after several decades of population explosion, there's just no place for people to go except for underground, which is why they're colloquially and sometimes derogatorily called the under races. At the same time, there's a drug called oxidium, which was released in the 2030s or thereabouts, that was said to limit the effects of ceridium so that Oryx could look less and less like Oryx and more like humans. And it turns out that it's turned into an addictive drug. And there are tons of like social repercussions because of that in the books and otherwise. And we've had to really consider, how does one treat things like second-class citizenship in a game? How does one treat drug addiction in a game that's meant to be cyberpunk but also be heroic, have urban fantastic elements, and be one that is accessible for everyone to play? Of course, like, I wouldn't give the game to people like under teenage years. Like, probably it's a bit more mature than that. So we've had to dial back, if not the ethos behind that, if not like the themes behind that, we've had to dial them back mechanically so that it doesn't feel like a GM is having to educate between like a human player and an Auric player in a high stress situation where there are specific mechanical implications for what the human is doing versus what the Auric is doing, because there are that would be a really interesting sociological study and like getting people together and seeing what that's like. But I'm not sure that it would be fun for the majority of gamers who just want to get in there and play and maybe have some like thematics, just like if you were playing Dungeons and Dragons and you're in a predominantly half elven territory and you're playing as a dwarf and they don't like dwarfs in that area or something like that. Like, that would be interesting, but you may not have any mechanical differentiation there.
Okay, so that makes sense. So it's definitely there for flavor in a lot of ways, because I agree with that sentiment, just because it was one of those things that I dealt with quite a few times. Again, I started role playing when I was in 8th grade. So, I started with D&D, where it's like we're all heroes running around, and then we found cyberpunk, and then we started feeling like horrible human beings. But it's
sounds about right.
It's one of those things to where, like, mechanically, when it's put into games, you almost in a way feel obligated to use it, And sometimes,
Right.
there's just people that might not want to explore that side of it, for lack of better terms. Where it's like, or if like you're playing Entromancy and like somebody joins the group that, is new to role playing and they think about everything on like the heroic level. And instead of, cyber psychosis is a big thing that pops up in a lot of cyberpunk games where, it's like, oh yeah, I'm all cybered up. And it's, you're like, I'm more robot man. And then it's like,
right.
You look at the games, you're like, well, the implications of that means that you don't feel feelings like everybody else anymore.
Right. So, have fun role playing.
and now you are literally the Swedish murder machine. So.
Pretty much.
See, I was imagining you going a different direction with that description. You have this new person that get in there like, we're all heroic, and they meet somebody else at the bar, and that person's finishing a line of Coke off the countertop, and it's like, all right, let's go kill shit.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Well,
so
the other...
what Nick just described is very cyberpunk. However, that may not be a good thing if you're like trying to play the game with people for the first time. They're like, oh yeah, this is kind of a heroics game. And by the way, here's my 13-year-old daughter. And it's like, yeah,
maybe not cocaine in this one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
not the cocaine.
The other issue that we found is that there's some nuance that you can provide in a storytelling context, that is very hard to translate to mechanics. The book, one of the some subtext in the book, or one of the the driving forces behind the themes in the book is about second-class citizenship and about how people are treated differently, and it's meant actually to demonstrate how inequality works and how socially sponsored oppression works. That's not something that is easily communicated by a mechanic, because if it just says you have a -2 to all rolls against law enforcement because you're an orc, that's just kind of it almost seems as though we're sponsoring that in a way. It doesn't really come across as being ironic or as indicative of our own, as game designers, our own view of the world and how we want to be supporters of equality in everything that we do. So it's something we've really had to massage and manage so that it feels good for everyone.
Yeah. Dark and gritty is one of those things. It can be, you can dive down a rabbit hole pretty fast. And again, so, looking at cyberpunk, and then even people that, originally played World of Darkness, right? Where you're dealing with Vampire the Masquerade or Werewolf the Apocalypse, where, a lot of people, if they started at a younger age, those games turned into, I'm a superhero with fangs,
right?
Compared to the real theme of the game, which is, no, I'm actually a bloodthirsty monster and I'm doing everything I can to keep my humanity.
Right.
You can look at that two different ways, but at the end of the day, that really comes down to how you are as a GM.
That's very true. It's very true. I mean, I don't know how this happens, but most of the parties or the groups that I GM for turn out to be chaotic neutral, irrespective of what their alignment says. So I could see that being a problem in our groups, at least. Yeah,
well, at least that way you could just be like, all right, I'm just going to add the grit back into the cyberpunk side of this,
right.
So you guys can deal with it. Awesome.
That's right.
So you mentioned obviously there's different races, so I'm assuming that in this game there are going to be monsters. It's not just going to be humans and subhumans or demi-humans or new race humans versus one another. There'll be monsters of different kinds.
That's correct. Yeah, we have a full monster list that you'll find things that are obviously lots of humanoids and things like assassins or sentries, but also drones. We have a whole host of drones, but monsters in the conventional sense, but that are more suited for the setting.
Mm-hmm.
You won't find a pseudo dragon or something like that. It's definitely something that is more themed towards the urban fantasy setting that is also adheres to our own, I guess you could call it a style guide or a theme that is within the Entromancy world. But yeah, they're monsters.
Cool. So it's not like you just took a red dragon and went, yeah, this is a red dragon with metal wings.
No, but now we will.
Oh, okay. So,
but yeah, definitely cool. Why wouldn't
Well,
you?
we have like these. There's a group of oryx, for example, that have been exposed that have become addicted to oxidium, the drug that we talked about earlier, and there has been a plague that has affected oryx that are addicted to oxidium, and the actual source of it is as yet unknown, and essentially they go into a frothing rage after with the slightest provocation. So we like to think of them as like angry zombies, and they've currently taken over a lot of the Presidium. So there's a lot of good action to be had there.
Great. So if you still want to have like your typical classical, let's go stomp some orcs, you can go do that too.
Oh yeah,
And
there's
not
plenty
feel
of room
bad
for
about
that
it
there.
because, again, there's more of an existential thing behind just going out and killing a bunch of orcs. But, we could save that for a different podcast.
It seems to be coming up a lot.
Yeah. Well, again, it's just some of the tropes just, again, like D&D, you look at it, you're like, oh, yeah, orcs. No, they're just there to kill.
Tim's just very bloodthirsty. Don't let him fool you.
Yeah. It's just, it's always like, okay, but what about the women and children in the village you just burned down? Nah, I just got some experience off of it. You're a paladin. But anyway, so
now I can read a new language.
Yeah, exactly. Now you burn
Yes.
down an orc village, kill all the children. I can now learn a new language.
Now I understand the scroll they handed me that said, "Please don't kill us. We don't mean any harm." I couldn't read my own language before that.
But on the flip
Good
side,
job.
I now have my noble steed. Awesome. So you have a few days left of the campaign, and you've already blown through your goal that you had, and you're actually a little over double. You've got, what is it, one more stretch goal to unlock?
That's right. It's the hacking mini game that we're working on right now.
Perfect. What happens if this blows past the hacking mini game? What happens if you get to 15 or 20,000?
I've been thinking about that, and I'd love for that to happen. We have some ideas in the works for further stretch goals, and I hesitate to mention them until we hit that hacking stretch goal. But yeah, we definitely have ideas in the works, and the great thing about this is that it's a full source book, that we're putting out there that will be launching next year, and that's the been the whole point of this Kickstarter is to make that a reality. But we have tons, and I'm talking about tons of ideas about supplements and other ways that we can build out further systems for the world, additional content like monsters. There are other things that we've been wanting to tackle that are specific to the world that I don't want to talk about too much right now, but different from other systems that we could that we have ideas in terms of other mini games or other supplements, or if we wanted to build out if people really love Destinies, we could do like a whole book just full of Destinies. So there's so much good stuff planned that where we are at right now serves as such a great springboard for us. And if the Kickstarter continues as it is, we'll just have more and more good stuff to look forward to.
Awesome. So I did notice that you have a special advisor on this game, some guy named Craig Campbell. I don't, for some reason, I know the guy, but
I don't know, something about murderous rages in an office setting.
Yeah, something.
That sounds right.
Maybe some gangsters.
Yeah, some flapper women with powers.
I'm trying to think of a joke of making like a fish dish and adding, like a pickled sort of vegetable to it, maybe capers.
Yeah, something like I think that would work.
There you go. Yeah,
I cannot say enough about Craig Campbell and the Indie Game Developer Network. They put us in touch about maybe almost 9 months, or I don't know, maybe longer than that, almost a year ago. And Craig, who has been around the block many times in terms of game development and has written for Dungeons and Dragons and other places, and is about to publish his second game in Capers. dude is awesome, and he's just like really willing to share all of his knowledge and know-how, not only about game design but also about like just the process of getting a Kickstarter together and how to fulfill Kickstarter rewards and how to deal with publishing and print on demand and all of these different things. It's just been really, really special to work with someone of his caliber.
Yeah, Craig is definitely a good guy. We were actually supposed to, every time that we tried to meet up to do early playtests of Capers, Nick, there was always some adulting that happened on somebody's side to where we're all like, let's do it Thursday. I can't. Saturday. Next Sunday.
The best part is when we had all agreed, he's like, all right, we've got this side figured out. And he sent out an email inviting, the group. And all of a sudden this person went, what day? I don't think that'll work. It was like hilarious because he put it out. He's like, all right, I've this whole story about just deconflicting everything. Yeah. And then, this other person was like, no, that doesn't work. and I think that was the last I heard from Craig for months. He was just like, screw it. The game doesn't need playtesting. It's fine.
So typical. That would make a really good blog of like just examining the logistics of gaming and like getting just like the basic human process of getting 4 people in a room or on a Skype call on a regular basis for literally anything. It's the hardest thing to do.
Oh yeah. We try to do it every week. Well, at least 3 people. Man.
Yeah.
Seems like it's working.
Oh, well, we have our ups and downs with it. This last week we didn't end up recording, but hey, it happens. But yeah, I mean, overall we do try to get at least the once a week in, for an hour, sometimes hour and a half on the mic. But yeah, as far as like getting together for an actual organized day of gaming, we keep saying we're going to do it once per month, and it has worked once.
Twice?
Actually. Oh yeah, twice. I'm sorry. Twice. So yeah,
that's pretty good.
In 2 years.
Is failing. Yeah, in 2 years. So let that sink in, folks.
That might not be the best success record.
Yeah. More battle reports. Well, when we can. That's all I got. How about you just shut up and stay tuned? But yeah, that's how that works. So awesome, man. So where can they find all of the information on Entromancy?
Great question. Entromancy.com has got links to basically everything anyone would ever want to know about Entromancy. The Kickstarter's up. It completes on September 6th. That's next Thursday or Thursday, whenever you're listening to this. It's a Thursday, September 6th at 9 p.m. Pacific time. After that, we'll be using Backer Kit in case anybody misses the campaign and wants to pick up the PDF as a pre-order. But yeah, entromancy.com. And if you're on Twitter or Facebook, you can find us at Entromancy. I also run a small YouTube channel, just like talking about game design and like help for people who are writing fantasy and that sort of thing, and GMing. Yeah, pretty much. We're not hard to find.
Perfect. Awesome, folks. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Skirmish Supremacy. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening to another episode of Skirmish Supremacy. To see more of the antics that Nick and I do, you can check us out on Facebook at Skirmish Supremacy. We also have Twitter, which we can be reached at Skirmish Supreme, because apparently Skirmish Supremacy does not fit in Twitter. And if you want to email us directly, you can reach us at tim@skirmishsupremacy.com or nick@skirmishsupremacy.com. Thanks for listening.